Welcome to Eastern Insights. Why does Eastern Europe's perspective on global affairs matter? Because here, history and geopolitics collide in ways that shape our world. Yet these voices often go unheard. This podcast bridges this gap. Each episode translates in-depth analysis from my Polish YouTube channel, Polityka Zagraniczna, which means international politics. For the last few years, this platform has dissected foreign policy, security, and the forces shaping Eastern Europe. Using AI tools like 11 Labs, we adapt these nuanced insights into English, preserving their depth while making them accessible to all. Whether we're unpacking Russia's latest moves, EU debates, or security challenges in Central Europe, our mission is simple: to foster informed dialogue by sharing Eastern Europe's untold stories. If you're curious about the world beyond headlines, subscribe now. Join me as we decode the complexities of global affairs, one Eastern European insight at a time.
Hi there and welcome. I'm so glad you're joining us for another episode. Today we're diving deep into what is arguably the most critical topic for Polish foreign policy right now: the ongoing crisis at the Polish-Belarusian border. It's a topic we simply have to cover on this channel. Now, I don't want to just repeat information you've already heard, so this isn't going to be a blow-by-blow account of the entire situation, which has been widely reported. In fact, we discussed it here on the channel many months ago. Nor will we focus on the more obvious details that have surely reached you this week. Instead, we'll start by examining the international reaction to what's unfolding on the Polish border. But then, and this is the much more crucial part, we'll try to answer that fundamental question: why? Why is all of this happening? Because, while answers like Lukashenko wants to destabilize Poland, or he's trying to hit the European Union and cause internal conflicts, are all true, today, we can actually say much more about the real goals behind this brutal exploitation of human tragedy. So, stick with me. Let's get started. First, let's acknowledge that this past week brought a significant escalation of events on the Polish-Belarusian border. Up until now, it's largely been a matter of regional policy, primarily concerning EU member states. It was certainly on the agenda for diplomatic cooperation, but the sheer scale of events this week has pushed the Polish-Belarusian border crisis squarely into the realm of international policy, even global politics. Just this past Wednesday, November 10th, the crisis was addressed by two of the most important politicians in the European Union. Charles Michel, the chairman of the European Council, spoke about it in Warsaw with Polish Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki, and Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, met with US President Joe Biden, where Belarus was a top discussion point. The core message from both these meetings can be summarized like this: the situation on the EU border with Belarus isn't just a migration crisis, it's an authoritarian regime's deliberate attempt to destabilize its neighbors. And, because of this, Belarus is facing further sanctions. The crisis even became a subject of discussion within the United Nations Security Council. That's, of course, one of the most, if not the most important bodies of that organization. Belarus's actions have been condemned by Security Council members like Ireland, Estonia, France, Norway, the United States, and Great Britain. Even Albania, which will join the Council soon, has spoken out. But here's the crucial point: nothing specific can be done about this through the Security Council. Why? Because Russia is a permanent member. Russia. While the statements condemning the Belarusian regime's actions, its attempt to destabilize the European Union, are absolutely true, there's no doubt whatsoever that Lukashenko's actions on this scale wouldn't happen without at least the acceptance, or more likely, the direct coordination, of Vladimir Putin. Russia, unequivocally, supports Belarus in this matter. Their position? That the migrants at the border are simply a consequence of what they call adventurous US policy and the West in general. They even accuse Poland and Lithuania of not behaving humanitarianly. For Russia, this is a highly convenient scenario. They support Lukashenko, but not so overtly that they're seen as a full partner in the crisis by the US or the EU. Lukashenko is becoming increasingly isolated, and the Russians can achieve their goals, theoretically, without getting their own hands dirty. Now, the North Atlantic Alliance, NATO, has also published a statement supporting Poland and Lithuania. New sanctions are reportedly in the works within the EU, and support for Poland and Lithuania generally seems to be widespread. But not all actions from allies concerning this matter have been met with gratitude in Warsaw. Annoyed. Oh no. Germany's actions, in particular, caused significant irritation. And this, my friends, brings us to a key part of answering why all this is happening. Germany's behavior is a partial answer to that very question. Poland was profoundly irritated by the fact that the then German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, was speaking with Russian President Vladimir Putin about the Polish border crisis. Now, diplomacy is a complicated art, and many messages can't be announced by a minister or prime minister. But the sentiments in Warsaw, following that conversation between the leaders of Russia and Germany, were perfectly captured by the head of Poland's most important advisory and analytical institution for international policy, the head of the Polish Institute of International Affairs. They tweeted, "My free advice for the new German government. If you want to talk about the Polish borders with the Russians, call Warsaw early and ask the Poles for permission. Otherwise, do not be surprised if you are not respected. Confirmed info." And then, a second entry. And what does Putin demand in return? Changes in the constitution of the Republic of Poland? Demilitarization of Central Europe? Apparently Merkel did not learn anything about Donbass. This interaction, on the Russia-Germany-Poland line, may be a key to understanding what this is really all about. Why are these events even taking place? But before we dive deeper into that, let me bring up one more crucial aspect that absolutely needs mentioning: Turkey. The intensification of meetings late this autumn, along with the purchase of Turkish weapons, had indicated Turkey as a very important strategic partner for Poland. All of this was a reaction from Polish diplomacy to the threat of our country being marginalized in international relations, especially in the shifting global power dynamics after the change of the U.S. president. Yet now, during a parliamentary debate on the border situation, Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki extended responsibility for the entire crisis to Turkey as well, stating that Turkey was working in full synchronization with Minsk and Moscow. And, he added, this has a prestigious pin, meaning it's a significant accusation. Using such strong language obviously had an effect. The Turks seemed impressed by these words, and it appears to have brought the desired results. The reason for the Prime Minister's words is quite simple. Many of the flights bringing migrants to Belarus are operated by Turkish Airlines or Belavia, originating from Turkey. The issue was initially raised in bilateral talks. Ankara declared they would reduce the number of flights, but this wasn't enough for Poland. Hence, the elevation of the matter to a much higher level. This played out strategically, because how could Erdogan, the almighty Sultan of the Ottoman Empire in reconstruction, as some see him, act in synchronization with anyone? In a diplomatic blink of an eye, the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs requested a conversation with a Polish correspondent. This was described by the Secretary of State of the President's office. And the results? Turkish Airlines confirmed they would not accept Iraqi, Syrian, or Yemeni citizens on flights to Minsk, with the exception of those holding diplomatic passports. Furthermore, the General Directorate of Civil Aviation of Turkey issued a ban on the sale of tickets for citizens of Iraq, Syria, and Yemen traveling to Belarus. This ban applies to both Turkish Airlines and Belavia, and to all airports. And this, my friends, is genuinely good news. A few sources of this migration are starting to dry up. When combined with diplomatic actions, for example, in Iraq, where the current government demanded the closure of Belarusian consulates, a picture emerges of significant difficulty in continuing to bring people to the border. However, these actions, while very important, have limited effectiveness for one simple reason. The migration pressure from the Middle East and Africa is, and will remain, huge. Truly desperate people, having done almost everything in the hope of a better life, will unfortunately continue to be vulnerable to the misfortunes that Belarus can exploit. Understanding this international context is vital for trying to predict how this situation might unfold in the future. But even more important is trying to figure out why all this is happening. What's the ultimate purpose behind the actions of the Russians and Belarusians? Now, of course, chuckle, I'm not inside the heads of Alexander Lukashenko or Vladimir Putin. But based on the information I've gathered and expert analyses, let me give you 4 possible reasons that might be driving this entire operation. The first goal is a military one. It's quite obvious that due to what's happening on the Polish border, more Polish services are appearing in the region than usual. It would be hard otherwise. On the Belarusian side, this is one of the most, if not the most, important aspects of this whole chaotic situation. Minsk claims that Poland is relocating troops to the border, insinuating that our country is preparing for some kind of offensive. Belarusian propaganda, when talking about this crisis, adopts very militaristic tones. It's therefore necessary to consider a scenario where instigating border interference is meant to create an excuse to relocate troops in the vicinity of Poland. And not just Belarusian troops, but Russian ones too. In fact, Russian strategic bombers are already patrolling the borders, and the relocation of troops will, of course, be included in the official reports of Belarusian authorities. Lukashenko has said this many times. Of course, Belarus and Russia have long shared a common security space. In military terms, from many angles, the border with Belarus is the border with Russia. But the presence of new Russian forces at the Polish border is no trifle. Even if this border crisis eventually ends, these troops could remain, becoming a permanent element of pressure on NATO. NATO would likely have to respond symmetrically to maintain credibility. This would sharpen the security situation in the region, and Poland, perhaps more than ever, would acutely feel that it truly is on the flank, that it is a NATO border state, something it seems many of us might have forgotten. The second issue, of no less strategic importance, is gas. The fact that Russia has long been trying to make Western Europe, especially, dependent on its raw material supplies, I don't think I need to convince anyone of that. Gas reaches Western Europe today primarily through Ukraine, and of course, through Belarus, further through Poland, and then west via the Yamal gas pipeline. And here again, my speculations aren't plucked from thin air, but come from direct threats made by the Belarusian regime. If Poland closes the border, Belarus can stop gas transit, says Lukashenko. Of course, he won't do it without Moscow's consent, but again, this could be Russia's move, just through Lukashenko. Let's add that the Russians and Belarusians, just like with the troops, are both threatening and, to build credibility, already partially acting on those threats. Gas supplies through the pipeline were reduced by 1/3 just yesterday. At the same time, the Russians are publishing messages claiming they have absolutely no intention of stopping gas supply. A typical good cop, bad cop game. And why is this in Russia's hands? Well, energy blackmail is a permanent element, a consistent part, of Russia's game in relation to Europe, primarily Western Europe. Let's consider how someone in Germany might view this. Germany needs more and more gas due to the energy transformation model they've adopted. You can find more on the German energy transformation model in the link we'll provide later. Germany needs more and more gas, and where do they get it from? This route through Ukraine is dangerous. War. Who knows what will happen? It's risky. And now it turns out that even this route through Belarus isn't secure. You never know what will happen, what they'll stir up on the border. The Belarusians are threatening to turn off the taps. And suddenly, Nord Stream 2 starts to look like a super rational and very safe undertaking. You can avoid all this Eastern European mess and connect directly with your supplier. And the fact that he is the source of all these problems, all this confusion in Eastern Europe, well, somehow, we can live with that. The third reason is quite simple, so I'll be brief. Virtually no one talks to Lukashenko anymore. Many countries don't even recognize him as a legally elected president. Creating a border crisis may be an attempt, so far completely ineffective, to break out of complete isolation. Perhaps the dictator believes he can force the West, the European Union, or his neighbors to negotiate, negotiations that would then legitimize him as president. And finally, the fourth and probably the most important reason, which perfectly illustrates the conversation between Angela Merkel and Vladimir Putin. Russia is needed again. Russia is necessary again to bring order in Central and Eastern Europe. It's a classic strategy. Create a problem and then become an essential element of solving that problem. How simple it is, and as you can see, effective all the time. Let's look at Ukraine. What we call Russian aggression in Ukraine, the Russians call something completely different. According to the Russians, people are rebelling against Ukrainians themselves. Russia isn't supporting them at all. Russia is merely an essential element of the peace process. Offers of Russian mediation concerning the Polish-Belarusian border crisis have already appeared, of course. And as the situation worsens, and unfortunately it probably will get worse, the West will publicly condemn Lukashenko. This is also why Russia supports Lukashenko so much. But quietly, everyone will be talking with Moscow. And while these conversations now sound like annoyed, hybrid attack, unacceptable, you absolutely have to stop. How many tragedies, how many deaths, how much cruelty? How much of this is Western public opinion able to bear before the West simply wears down and asks, "Okay, what do you want?" I hope this discussion has brought you at least a few important pieces of information and perhaps a few answers to very important questions concerning what is probably the largest border crisis in Poland's history. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.